Here we go. Hello, world. My name is John, and I just started recording my life story of my life. Um, I don't. I'm not. I'm not really 100% convinced that I should really do that, and I'm not even sure if I got something to say, and if it's gonna be interesting enough to for other people to be watching this, but I literally have nothing else to do. So I told myself, why not? Let's do this. So all these recordings are unscripted. I'm not even gonna edit it. I'm just gonna talk my mind, and that's it. So my name is John, and I'm currently located in Czechia, in Europe, even though I spent most of my adult life in United States. And in my previous video, I was talking about how I started working on that house that I made the video of, the kitchen remodel time lapse. And I was saying that there is a lot more story to that house than the video itself. So let me just follow up on that, and hopefully I'll get somewhere from there. So while I was working on that house, I ran into a whole bunch of problems and delays. One of the biggest delay for me was the people that I hired. Uh, I didn't have good luck with hiring people. I posted a ad on Craigslist, locally in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and literally only, like, lazy people and people who were using drugs, and slow people, and all kinds of trash people just been calling me. I had my phone, ringing constantly, and I just randomly picked, somebody, some people to just come over and start working with me, and because I didn't want to waste much time by selecting, another people, and I just didn't have time for that. So I was happy when I picked someone, and that someone showed up and worked with me. So this one guy helped me with digging all the French drains under the house. All right, it was working fine. He was a hard working guy, but he wasn't very smart. So once we finished all the French drains, and we moved up to working on that floor framing, uh, he showed up to be uh, a pretty stupid guy. He couldn't even measure. He couldn't cut straight. He didn't know how to change a blade on the saw. And basically, one day I just lost it because he was so slow cutting boards, and he cut it too short, too long, and I I didn't have patience for that. So eventually we started arguing a lot, and he was he was trying to boss me around. He was trying to tell me how I should do things. He didn't understand that I was his boss and he was working for me. I mean, I felt like it was the other way, and he was, just trying to cover up his own inabilities to work uh, efficiently, fast and good and well. So eventually, I had to fire that guy, and I was forced to start searching for another people. So, well, actually, prior to this guy, I actually had another guy, Puerto Rican guy, and he also started working with me on the demolition, and then we moved under the house. And once he realized how much work it was to work under the house, he just disappeared. One day he just left for lunch and and never came back and never called me or anything. So that guy just disappeared without pay. He didn't even call me back to pay him for the job, and and that was it for the Puerto Rican. So then the black guy that was helping me with the digging, and then I had to start searching for another uh, helper. So then I found a Mexican guy. At least that's what he said. He was from Mexico, and he was about 43 years old. And honestly, I thought, well, actually, no. He said he was like 35, and I honestly thought that he was like 45 because he looked so old. And in the beginning, he was working fast. I mean, we would be hauling ass, and he was cutting good, and he was trying to do his job well. And and then, as days were passing by, he was getting slower and slower. And a couple of weeks in, I realized that he's like really tired. He was like really tired, and I don't know if he was in pain or whatever. He was, just uh, getting slower and slower. And then one day he fell off of like a ramp. He was pushing a wheelbarrow up the ramp onto my trailer, trying to dump some trash, and he fell down and he broke his finger. He broke his finger and he hurt his back, and he said, I have to go to hospital and that, and this and that, and I'm in pain. So I was like, okay, and so let me know how you're doing. And then he the next days he was calling me and asking me for my workman's compensation, for my insurance information, that he needs to go to the doctor and get a surgery or whatever. And I told him, I mean, you knew that you are working under the table. I was paying you cash. I didn't ask you for any uh, tax ID or social security number or whatever. You knew you were working for me, under the table. So why are you asking me all that information? I don't have any insurance. I mean, what do you want? And he started threatening me that he knows his laws, and he's gonna sue me for the money. And I was like, man, do whatever you need to do. I got nothing else to tell you. I mean, if that's what you need to do, just do it. I mean, I'm ready for it. I mean, I cannot help you with your injury. It's not my fault that you fell, that you don't know how to walk up the ramp. So he kept calling me, texting me, and threatening me, and all that. And then eventually one day it stopped, and I never heard back from him. So then I was searching for, another people. I had to finish all the flooring myself, and then I hired another Puerto Rican guy, and he's been with me for about 3 months, helping me out. But uh, you know, it was so crazy because sometimes he showed up only like 3 days a week. I never knew when he was coming to work and when he's not. Then he ended up going to jail for a period of time, couple of weeks. I don't really remember. And and most of the days he came to work smelling like alcohol, and I think he had a drinking problem. But anyway, he was trying to work. He was trying to work. He was trying to do a job, a good job, but it didn't go well. I mean, anything he touched, he messed up. He had to redo everything like two, three, four, five, six times. I remember this one time I had him cut this board on the front of the house on the soffit, and he had to recut it six times. So this guy cost me so much money because of the material he wasted and the time it he took. But I kept him anyway, because I didn't have time for searching another guy. I actually had another guy who just showed up at my house, like a black guy. One day he showed up, just he wanted to just rake my leaves. So I had him rake my leaves, and then I told him, hey, you wanna work? And he said, okay. So I gave him all the cleaning jobs in the house, and taking the trash out, the debris, taking the debris out to the dumpster and all that. So, and that guy was working also so slow. And I think I paid him only like $8 an hour because he was so slow. So I didn't mind for the Puerto Rican be so slow, and he didn't show up very often for work because I was doing tons of technical stuff, that need some kind of level of skills that only I could do it. And while I was doing it, I didn't have time for babysitting him. So every time he showed up, I had a bunch of work ready for him, and I gave him kind of work that he could work on himself. Some framing. I mean, there's not much you can fuck up on framing or whatever. So I gave him a little bit of work with framing. Then I uh, put him up on siding. Well, actually, there's also the roof, right? I had to replace the roof shingles, and I wanted him to work with me on that. But by the time I needed to start the roofing, he was still not finished with whatever he was doing. So I was doing the roof, and I actually asked him to bring, if he knows some more people, if he can bring some more people, and he brought about uh, five another five Puerto Ricans. And I remember they all showed up, and he told me, "Hey John, I told you I can bring people. I know people." Yeah, but out of those five people, three people left immediately. They never came back, and two guys stayed. Right. So with those two guys, I thought I'm gonna knock out the roof in a few days, but it didn't work out either. One of the guy didn't have any experience on the roofing. So basically, if I worked just by myself, I would probably do it faster than two of us together. So he was no help. So I tried to switch the guys. So I called the other guy. He said he's got some kind of experience, and I was like, cut me the shingle like 13 and 1/8. And he was like, hey, can you show me on the tape measure? Can you show me on the tape measure what's the 1/8? What is the 1/8? So I showed him the measurements, and he didn't know anything about American uh, measurements. uh, what's it called? The imperial measurements. Right? So he didn't know anything about inches and the fractions, 1/8, 1/16, quarter, half inch, 3/4. He didn't know anything about that because they are using a metric system in Puerto Rico. So that didn't work out either. So I just got so pissed off. I just jumped down from the roof and I was like, "Hey, everybody, get the fuck out of here!" And I fired everybody, and except the Puerto Rican, the original Puerto Rican guy. So everybody else left. The two guys, and I think there was another guy. I don't really remember. And I decided to do the roof all by myself. So it took me 3 weeks to cover the roof, and luckily the weather wasn't bad. It was good, and I was able to cover it up before it started raining, and so that's that. And then I put the poor. I'm trying to Jose. Yeah, I think his name was Jose. So I put him on siding, but that didn't go well either. So after it took him 3 weeks to finish just one side of the house, to cover it with siding, and it was also because he showed up only a few days a week for work, and it was really starting to piss me off. And in the meantime, I hired another uh, couple of guys to help me with the sheetrock, yeah, to cover all the walls. I had everything else, ready. Everything, plumbing, electrical, everything was done, and I hired a couple of guys, and that didn't go well either. They didn't screw the sheetrock well, and there was, big gaps, and they missed screws. And then one day another guy showed up, just walking uh, from the street to my house, and he was about over 50 years old, and he was like, "Hey, John, your neighbor told me you're looking for somebody. I'm great finisher. I do the patching and taping and all that." So I'm like, "Okay, man, come on board. I need you." So that's when the biggest trouble came. And so I bought him, the plaster and tape and all that, and I told him, "Hey, listen, man, these guys that did the drywall, they missed a bunch of screws. I mean, look at this right here. They didn't screw, like entire edge of the drywall. So anywhere you see a screws missing, I need you to add it, there before you start taping it and uh, patching it." So I checked on him, from time to time, but I couldn't really uh, check it, if when he already taped it and plastered it, I couldn't see if he added the screws in there or not. And he seemed to have lots of experience. He was working fast. He was multitasking. He was running from room to room, and he was hauling ass, and it seemed like he was doing a good job. So after he patched everything and sanded, it was looking pretty good. So I paid him for the job, and I thanked him, and then I continued, and then I started painting. And in the meantime, the Puerto Rican, I fired the Puerto Rican because he messed up my siding. So I actually had to also finish the siding myself, and I did the other side of the house. I did in few hours. I mean, it was pretty much the same difficulty, so I did it in few hours. Maybe like one full day, and he was working on the same size about 3 weeks. So he was working really slow. So I fired him too. So and then I started painting, right? And while I was applying the primer, I I, I noticed all the walls started cracking, like in the joints, like everywhere, all the walls, all the ceilings, and everything. I was like, what the fuck? I mean, I just painted everything and it looks like shit. I mean, what do I do? So I realized the problem was the plaster that we were using. We were using the pre-mixed plaster in the buckets, and I'm never gonna use that again. Um, and also, uh, when I started repairing all the cracks on the ceilings and walls, yeah, basically I had to scrape all the plaster off. I had to take the tape off. I had to retape it and replaster and resand it. And while I was doing it, I found many places that they had screws missing on the drywall. So I had to add bunch of screws, and I was doing this for another 4 months. So it took me 4 months, 4 extra months, just to go around the house and redo all the joints and add some screws and apply another plaster that doesn't crack. So this was a major setback on that progress. And then after I had all this done, I started uh, painting again with the primer. And then I realized, I noticed some bubbles on the wall, and all the walls started bubbling, from that primer. I was using the cheap primer that's used for spraying, and that primer caused the plaster, because some of the walls had like a thin coat, skim coat of plaster on it, because uh, it was nasty, and so we had to apply a skim coat on many walls, and that skim coat started blistering. All right, so I didn't know what to do, and that was on July 7th. I remember exactly that day, July 7th of 2016, when I realized I am not going to finish that house on schedule, on time, because I wanted to have it, done, sometimes in the summer 2016. And on July 7th, I realized I'm not gonna make it. All I was doing was plaster, sand, trying to fix all the blistering and bubbles, and I couldn't figure out why it was, blistering and bubbling, and it was misery. It was fucked up. I started calling this situation clusterfuck, because it was never ending. I mean, my hands, my shoulders, everything. I was in so much pain, because I was, fixing all the ceilings and all the cracks, and I was basically redoing everything he did with the plaster, and I think so some places I had to redo like 3 or 4 times, uh, and then I was trying to figure out what do I do with all the bubbles. So I was basically running around the house, up and down, and living room, and all the rooms, bedrooms, kitchen, and plastering and scraping off the plaster and replastering and sanding again. And then I told myself I'm gonna use the um, uh, what's it called, uh, the latex primer. So when I used the latex primer, it was also bubbling a little bit, but after that primer dried, the bubbles disappeared. So I realized that this is probably the solution for all the bubbling. That I'm gonna use, I'm gonna do a couple of coats of that latex primer, and that should take care of it. And in the end, it did. But it was all after uh, July 7th. On July 7th, I just dropped that sander, and I'm like, I'm going to the beach. I Fuck it, man. I don't give a fuck about this shit anymore, and I'm leaving. So I took my van and I went to the beach, to the Outer Banks, and I was there for about 2 weeks. And I was trying to just chill and surf and just drink beer. I met some girls, and I broke my finger and I hurt my ribs from surfing. And I came back from the beach, and I couldn't move because I hurt my ribs, so I couldn't move, and I still needed to work on the house. So I took about total of a month off work. So at that point, I knew I'm already like 6 months late, and I still needed to finish the house. So I was in pain. I was tired. I was frustrated, and basically I didn't even want to go back to that house. I mean, I literally like shut down, and I didn't want to work on that house. But then eventually I had to start work again, and I did some work in the crawl space. I added insulation on the bottom. I had to do that first because it was just sitting there under the house, and I needed to install it. And then I finished all the plastering and all that, and I started painting. And when I started painting, I realized the weather's going bad, and the paint wasn't drying fast. And I think it was like uh, September or October. I don't really remember the exact date of Hurricane Matthew, but then I wasn't even watching the weather forecast, because I was working inside the house all the time, so I didn't care about the weather. But I was noticing that the sky is getting dark, and actually at that time I already ran out the money for the first time, and I sold my van, my brand new van I bought 2015 for $40,000. I sold that September. I sold it because I ran out of money, so I sold it for $21,000. So in 1 year I lost $20,000 on that van. And I bought a beat up truck, a lifted F-250, old truck. I think it was like 1989, and that was like a piece of shit. I can talk about it later. But let me get back to that hurricane. So on my way home, the night before the storm, I stopped by a McDonald's, and I watched TV, and I saw the forecast, and the hurricane forming, and that is gonna hit the coast, and it's probably gonna go our way. So everybody was bracing for the storm except me. so so the so I'm looking at this time. It's 30 minutes. I'm talking right now, and I didn't get too far. So let me just close it for today, and I'll continue with the hurricane story and the flooding next time. All right. So that's it for today.